So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Our speakers today are from Valley Water, used to be known as Santa Clara Valley Water District. And I am not going to steal their thunder. They will tell you some things about themselves. We have Michael Martin and Ashley Shannon. Great. So Michael will start, okay? And let's give both of them a 100W welcome.
Okay, so I'm on. Okay, my name is Michael Martin. I'm an Associate Water Resources Specialist with Valley Water. As she mentioned, it was formerly Santa Clara Valley Water District. We're going through a name change. I'll probably mostly say Water District in my presentation because that's what I'm more used to still, but also may bring in Valley Water. It's the same thing. I've been with the Water District around 17 years, in the water supply planning section for about 3 years. Let's see. So the Water District itself, we have 3 primary objectives. The first is providing water supply to the county. The second is flood protection. And the third, stewardship, healthy creeks and ecosystems. 2 things we're specifically not responsible for. On the water supply side, we're a water wholesaler. We manage the groundwater basin. We bring in water, imported water, which I'll talk about coming up. But we're not the retailer. We make sure water's in the ground for groundwater pumping. That's a water supply, or from our treatment plants. But the actual water delivered to residents and businesses is through 14 different water retailers throughout the county. Some are city-run, some are private entities, but we're different from the retailers in the water supply side. The second thing is we're not a land use agency. We have no authority to approve or deny a new residential proposal, a new big office development. We don't say how close buildings can be to a creek or not. We have opinions on such matters, but those are controlled by land use agencies, the cities and the county. The Water District is a public agency. It was formed by an act of the state legislature. We have a board of directors that's elected by county residents by district. So depending where you live, you have a particular board member. They make the decisions for approving or denying our big capital projects policy going forward. This is a graphic that the Water District put together. It shows groundwater levels and population over since the start of the 20th century. And I'm going to spend a few minutes on it because it helps kind of define what our water supply is, where our water comes from, and how that came to be. So if you go back to the early 1900s, Santa Clara County was a much different place. It wasn't Silicon Valley then. It was known as the Valley of Heart's Delight. It was the region was known as a leading fruit producing and packaging region in the whole world. There were orchards covering the whole Santa Clara Valley. And to provide for that orchards and that agriculture, a lot of groundwater, a lot of drills were welled to irrigate those crops. And a lot more water is being pumped out that was going in. So here, let's see, oops. There we go. Okay, so we see groundwater levels declining rapidly. I'm not going to talk much about subsidence, but that was a major issue that came out early as part of the groundwater pumping, and is a big factor in what the Water District has done over the years, trying to prevent ground subsidence by managing the groundwater basin. But early residents or leaders of the county were concerned about this overdraft of groundwater, and they proposed a water district to deal with the situation. And in 1929, the voters approved the Santa Clara Valley Water Conservation District, which was the forebearer of Valley Water today. That water district, conservation district, got busy. They built 6 reservoirs in the 1930s in the foothills around San Jose. The purpose of those reservoirs were to capture winter rains and then release them in the spring and summer to recharge the groundwater basin through the creek channels. They also built the first groundwater basins, recharge ponds that you see throughout the county. where water diverted from the reservoirs was sent down, diverted into these basins to percolate into the groundwater basin. So in the after that, I don't have my mouse there, you see groundwater levels start going back up until the 1940s. During that time, that's really the start of the change of Santa Clara County from an agricultural base to an urban base. And a lot of people started moving into Santa Clara County. All those people were using more water than the orchards they were replacing. So you see a deep drop in groundwater levels again, as groundwater is the only source of water for everything going on in the county. Until the 1950s, the Water District built another 4 reservoirs, the 2 largest, Lexington and Anderson, built during that time. That helped stabilize things. But into the 60s, population was still booming, groundwater levels started collapsing further. By that point, most of the local creeks of any substance had already been dammed. There wasn't really any more local water that could be produced. So the Water District started looking outside. During this time, the state and federal governments were both busy building large water projects. The Central Valley Project, which is the federal side, has Lake Shasta as its main component, and the state water project, Lake Oroville, is its main component, capturing water in the north part of the state, sending it down the Sacramento River through the Sacramento Delta to giant pumps near Tracy, where it was sent to points south. The federal project was more focused on the agriculture in the Central Valley. The state side was more focused on residential development, urban development down in Southern California. But in 1965, we became one of those points in the state project. We started receiving water through what's the South Bay Aqueduct, which goes from those plants in Tracy down to East San Jose. Originally, that water just helped augment the groundwater program, but later the district built 3 water treatment plants. So we treat the water, imported water mostly coming in, and that's sent to the retailers. And that was really to take some pressure off the groundwater pumping, because again, until this time, all water supply was from the groundwater basin. Having these water treatment plants took pressure off that. So you can see the box down at the bottom there. Where am I? Started receiving state water that helped groundwater levels to a point. In 1980s, we got a contract with the federal side, the Central Valley Project. That water is delivered from San Luis Reservoir along Highway 152 near Los Banos, up through the south, or the South County, to the base of Anderson Reservoir in Morgan Hill. So those were 2 large imported water supplies that really helped stabilize the groundwater level. Subsidence of the county dropped about 13 feet over those years that we had groundwater overdraft. And since the 1980s or so, we've had a pretty stable groundwater level at a good level. We had added 2 other sources really during that time: recycled water, which is tertiary treated water for landscaping and industrial uses, and also water conservation, which isn't a supply per se, but it helps stretch the water we have go much further. So this is our system currently. Again, where there's raw water treatment pipelines, drinking water pipelines, 3 pumping plants, 3 drinking water plants, the percolation ponds. Other thing to mention, where are we? Up here along the top, there's another pipeline. This is the Hetch Hetchy pipeline. San Francisco gets its water from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park. They also serve most of the peninsula, San Mateo County, parts of the East Bay, and parts of, they have a pipeline that goes through Santa Clara County, the south part of the bay, and that helps serve the cities along the north end of the bay. Milpitas, San Jose, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, all get water, in addition from us, from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, the Hetch Hetchy water. So overall, of our sources, 60% is imported water coming into the county used. 90% is natural groundwater or natural rainwater that's recharged into the groundwater basin. 15% local water from our reservoirs being used for groundwater recharge. Some of that now could also be sent to treatment plants when necessary. And 5% recycled water. And that kind of starts us in the water supply planning process. Up at the top there, we have looking at potential future demands and supplies. So I kind of talked about the supplies that we have available currently to us. We also try predicting what future demands might look like. This is demand and population since 1990. There's been pretty steady population growth since 1990. Water supply has been fairly flat, or demand has been pretty flat. You see it kind of grows from 90 to 2000, but then there's two big drops in 2008 and around 2013. Recessions and big droughts both reduced water demand. And to the point where water demand still is about the level that it was in 1990. So we're not using any more water even though we have substantially more people in the county. We try to project that out into the future. We're just completing our water supply master plan at the water district. That looks at what sort of infrastructure we might need to invest in to meet future demands. So this is a projection. We think demands will bounce back up after the drought, after a few years, and then growing slowly with population. Population is also expected to grow well into the future. Population demand comes from both ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is now part of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which are local regional governments for the Bay Area, projecting growth, projecting transportation needs, and for us, helping project what future water demand may be in the future. We also work with the cities and retailers, what their general plans are looking at, how much growth they're anticipating, what type of growth. Multifamily units, residential don't use as much as single-family residential because of the lack of landscaping. So knowing the amount and types of growth are important in our demand projections. We also try to look at uncertainty. This is how much water, given our existing supplies, that might yield to us in 2040, kind of our planning horizon. Is it going to be 200,000 acres that we get, acre-feet of water, or is it going to be up to 450,000 acre-feet of water? There's a lot of uncertainty in that. Given climate change, regulations, it's mostly environmental regulations, especially in the Delta, technological innovations, politics, economics. So knowing what our future supplies and demands are, we start looking at, well, what's the gap? Do we have any shortages? For that, we use, did I miss one there? No. We have a model that we use at the Water District, WEAP, the Water Evaluation and Planning Model. We put in all our infrastructure, the rules about how we move water around. We have different inputs for it. Some of them are based on historical past inflows into reservoirs, how much imported water we're getting, how much water typically recharges. And this is a model that was run through a hydrologic cycle of 1922 through 2015. So that gives us wet years, it looks at dry years. We look at 1977 in particular, which is the biggest one-year drought. We look at string of dry years, 1987 to 1992, again, 2013 to 2015. So we run our system through these different, through that cycle of water to see if we're able to meet demands. I'll go to this one here, because what we're trying to hit is our level of service goal. Our level of service goal is to meet 100% of demand in normal years and to meet at least 80% in dry years. This was recently updated early this year by our board. Before it was 100% normal years and 90% in dry years. But based on what people are willing to pay, the amount people are willing to conserve. During the last drought in 2015, we saw conservation of 30% over normal 2013 to 2015 water use. So people are able to conserve up to 30% when needed. The costs of providing that extra supply from a 90% to an 80%, that extra 10%, is actually pretty high, our analysis showed. The frequency, is it happening every year? No, more it's every 10, 15 years. So it's not something we're asking people to do all the time, but more once a decade or so. And then benchmarking, it's actually pretty consistent with what other water agencies are doing in the area. So we know we have a shortage. We know we need to provide some more supplies to meet demand by 2040. So we look at different investments that we might pursue. And we have a list. We had a list of about over 40 projects, such as expanding storage, expanding our local reservoirs, investing in some statewide storage, that expanding Los Vaqueros and Contra Costa County, building a new reservoir in Sites, which is in the North Sacramento Valley, looking at different water conservation, demand management programs that we could start at the water district, recycled water, how that could be expanded, looked at desalinization, how we could use additional groundwater basins that would help us better use the supplies we have. So we looked at a bunch of different projects individually and then together in portfolios. Okay, how are you going to meet the gap that we have to meet demands in 2040, by 2040? That was done in conjunction with different stakeholders. Our board of directors has the final say. They'll approve our water supply master plan and have been engaged in its development, what they want to see, different board committees, retailer committees. Our retailers, of course, are very interested in making sure we have water to supply and how much that's going to cost. Stakeholder work groups, different meetings with different groups. So that brings us, in the end, we'll select a strategy and then monitor going forward. Missed one there. The strategy we're coming up with for the Water Supply Master Plan is called Ensure Sustainability Strategy. It has three main components: secure existing supplies, expand conservation and reuse, and then to optimize the system. And for secure existing supplies, that includes work on the Delta Conveyance Project. This was formerly known as Cal Water Fix. I don't know if I'm even familiar with that. Our new governor nixed, but not quite nixed that project, wants to see it at a reduced scale. It's now called the Delta Conveyance Project, trying to make sure that we can maintain our existing supplies that we get from imported water through the Delta. Also dam seismic retrofits. A few of our dams have been found or were built on or near earthquake faults and need to be substantially fixed or rebuilt. That includes Anderson. We have a big project going on right now with Anderson. Right now, we don't have full capacity of those reservoirs because of their concern. If they fail during an earthquake, we wouldn't want to see massive flooding, so they're kept at about 50% of their capacity currently, depending on the reservoir, to make sure we don't have that sort of catastrophe until we could implement some fixes on those reservoirs. Under conservation and reuse, there's a whole suite of conservation stormwater capture programs that the board has given okay to on planning to start looking at. Also potable reuse. This is taking recycled water and fully purifying it to drinking water standards. So it could be introduced to the groundwater basin or into our treatment plants as a direct new source of water supply. And then optimize the system, looking for ways, new groundwater recharge basins so we could use the imported water we have. Pacheco Reservoir is out towards San Luis Reservoir. It's a small reservoir that exists right now, looking to expand that to a big reservoir, about 140,000 acre feet. That would help us use our water that we get on the federal side, imported water. Also, Transfer Bethany Pipeline listed there. That would be from Los Vaqueros Reservoir in Contra Costa County and would provide a different link to get imported water through Contra Costa Water District instead of relying on the state water project pumps, which often have restrictions on them that limit their use. And there's a great deal of uncertainty. So there's a lot of checkpoints. There's an annual update that's provided that we'll be doing every year to our board. The master plan itself will be updated every 5 years as a plan, and then, like I said, annual plans in between that, to make sure that the projects we're considering are feasible, they're going forward. We haven't found any real problems with them. Also, checking demands. Often, a lot of these plans in the past, the water supply master plans, they project demands into the future. Often those demands are much higher projected than they actually turn out to be. That's because of water conservation efforts, other efforts that reduce water demand. Like I said, the last 20 years, we really haven't seen an increase in demand even though, of course, back then we'd projected demands to go up with population. So making sure we're still matching new projects to meet demands and not overbuilding, which would be just an added expense. And by that time we get back to the start, we, like I said, every 5 years go back to the water supply master plan process and always keep looking at those supplies and demands. So that's our water supply planning effort. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley at this point to talk about water conservation.
Situated here. All right, hello. This is working. Thanks for having me. I'm Ashley Shannon. I'm with our water. I'm a water conservation specialist. So Michael and our unit is the water supply planning and conservation unit. So on the conservation side, we work to promote conservation through rebate programs, educational programs, outreach, giveaways, and whatnot. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So as Michael mentioned, I'm sure you're all aware, we were just in a pretty severe drought, one of the most severe droughts that we've had in the last 500 years. And from 2016 to 2012 to 2016 is kind of the time period for that drought, although it wasn't really declared a drought until 2014, but we had a couple of dry years leading up to that. As you can see by this index with notes, it's a Palmer Drought Severity Index. This shows the severity of drought and then rainfall from a little over the last 100 years. And the severity of our droughts are increasing as a result of changing climate, and so we're getting more water in the wet years and drier, longer droughts and drier. So we're concerned about the increase in the severity of the droughts that we're experiencing at this point. Climate change analysis has shown that we're going to, while we might be receiving more rainfall, it's going to be in shorter periods of time, and then we're going to have longer periods of time where we have drought, and so we have a big concern about that. So these maps are the U.S. Drought Index. The one on the left shows, this is actually from March 2015. If we looked at one right now, there would be no more yellow on the top and a little bit less yellow on the bottom. This drought index kind of shows the severity of drought in different regions of the state. So as we move from no color to yellow all the way down to red and really dark red, the darker that you get, the more severe it is. So during the height of our drought in 2016, we were considering experiencing extreme drought conditions in the majority of the state, which is a big concern. We were lucky to have a pretty diverse supply of water, but other areas of the state, may only have one water supply, and if that one goes dry, they don't have the infrastructure to get more water in. Let's see. As Chris Orrick of the Department of Water Resources says, there's no longer an average year in California. With climate change, our extremes are more extreme. In 2015, our snowpack, Sierra snowpack, was at 5% of normal. This is the 500-year low on record, which is pretty crazy, as opposed to this year, where we have, I think it was at 150% of normal. So that's a pretty big stretch within a pretty short period of time as far as the amount of rainfall that we get. So we don't really know when it's going to dip really low and then when we have to conserve. As a result of this last drought, though, about 2014, when the drought was declared, Governor Brown declared the drought for the state and asked that the state, across the state, cut the water use by 25%. In Santa Clara County, our residents, as Michael mentioned, responded really well to that, and we were seeing levels of 28, 30% water savings throughout the county as compared to our 2013 water use. So that helped carry us through the drought and we're able to avoid levels of instances of subsidence, our land dropping because our groundwater supplies got too low. So the community really kicked in. But as a result of this severe drought in 2016, Governor Brown directed that we take more action to use water wisely. So there's a couple bills that were put into place, Senate Bill 606 and Assembly Bill 1668. These provide more directive to water retailers, water agencies to come up with a water supply plan, to implement more long-term water restrictions, things like hosing off hardscape, things like that aren't allowed. And then also to increase the long-term standards. So we're trying to make water conservation a way of life instead of just having a drought reaction. So in drought, we are able to really cut down our water usage, but then after droughts, people have a tendency to kind of go back to their old habits. And so, as a result of that last drought, we're really trying to, and the state is trying to convey the message that we're always living in a state that doesn't have a lot of water, and our population is increasing. And so water conservation is actually something that we need to strongly incorporate into our everyday life, not just in a drought situation, but in our everyday situation. So it's a couple other different things that have come into play because of this. Starting in January, there's some changes in what type of irrigation equipment can be sold, certain types of sprinkler bodies that have to meet certain requirements. And so standards of products that we use, such as toilets, clothes washers, the state has implemented efficiency standards for these, which has helped us conserve water a lot. So there's still a lot that we can do, though. So water conservation is important for a number of reasons, which I'm sure that you're all aware of. One of the big one is that people don't think about often is the energy savings. About 20% of the entire energy used in the state of California is used for water. So that's treating water, transporting water, heating water, and so with water conservation, it's also tied into energy conservation. So the two go hand in hand, and I think a lot of people don't make that connection. Water conservation also helps us meet our goals for the county. So as Mike mentioned, our population has grown pretty significantly, but our water use has stayed the same. And this is not per capita water use, but overall water use. And that's because we're learning how to use water more efficiently. So while there are more people in the county, we're using the same amount of water that we used when we had less of people in the county. So to give a little breakdown of our county and where we use our water, the vast majority of our water is used in residential homes. It's a big change from when this county used to be all agriculture. Now agriculture makes up a pretty small portion of our water usage, only about 8%. Dedicated landscape meter, that's some water retailers will actually just meter landscape water as opposed to one meter that meters landscape and building water. This is usually for commercial sites, so that's why it's broken out. But residential water use is by far one of our biggest water uses. And with that, with residential water use, about 50% of water use for residential sites is outdoors, so in the landscape. So there's a huge potential for water conservation within the landscape because so much of it we use. A lot of what we're using inside, we used to have rebates for high efficiency toilets, high efficiency washers, but as state standards were improved, someone can't go to a store, you can't go to a box store and buy an inefficient toilet anymore or buy an inefficient clothes washer. And so we're finding that our rebate programs and our focus on water conservation now is turning to the outdoor sector because that's where we have the greatest potential for water conservation. There is still potential indoors, but outdoors is a huge benefit. So I'm going to go through some of our water conservation programs that we offer and also make a little plug. So we have a number of student interns who work with us in our water conservation unit. Generally, we have about 5 or 6 of them at a time, and they're with us for about 2 years. And it's a great position. It's a paid position, but it's really great. We have really amazing interns. A number of them are from San Jose State. We also get a few from Santa Clara University, and then from a few from the junior colleges. But the vast majority of them are from San Jose State. And so interns help us quite a bit with our rebate programs. It's definitely not an internship where you're just making copies and fetching coffee and stuff like that. Our interns are actually, we couldn't run these programs without them. During the height of the drought, our program participation increased so much that we actually had 25 interns working for us. Our landscape rebate program, we saw probably a 500% increase in participation in the program as a result of the drought. So people were very concerned. So if you're ever interested, let us know. But we run a number of residential programs, landscaping, a few for commercial and agriculture, and then lastly what we do is outreach. So I'm just going to run through our programs and kind of give some detail on what we do. So our programs for residential, and I'll go through each one of these separately. It's a broad array from outdoor surveys where we send out a professional to evaluate someone's irrigation system, to rebates that actually will cut a check to somebody once they participate in this program. All right, so our WaterWise survey program, we offer this program to residential sites in the county, everybody except for San Jose Water Company customers because they have an equivalent program for theirs. And we actually have somebody who is, we have a couple people who are irrigation professionals. They go to a site, they turn on the irrigation system, they evaluate it, they point out leaks, and they'll, and so it's a pretty extensive program, and we do this for free. All of our programs for free for customers, or we actually give customers money. So that we don't have any programs where we're asking for money from the public, which is kind of a nice job to have where you're just kind of giving things away all the time. We have a free do-it-yourself kit where people can evaluate their own indoor water use. So if you wanted to check on the places that you live, you can evaluate how much water is flowing through sinks and whether they could use an aerator to slow that flow, whether a toilet is leaking, how to read a water meter. So a lot to kind of give people the tools to understand their water usage themselves and how to evaluate when they might have a leak on their own. So I talked a little bit about the outdoor portion of the program, but it's an extremely useful program. So most of the water loss that we have in a landscape and why landscapes are so efficient is because they're using old, inefficient irrigation equipment. And so I like to say, new cell phones come out all the time. When a new one comes out, everybody's really excited and they line up to get a new one, and everyone wants the latest technology, and we live in Silicon Valley where everything's super advanced. And then we have our irrigation systems that have been in place for the last 20, 30 years, and they're broken and they're not working well, and people are totally content with just living with this old technology. And so we have programs that kind of encourage people to remove these old items, and this program identifies, when there's an opportunity and when things aren't working correctly. All right. Another program we have is our gray water laundry to landscape rebates. I actually installed one of these at my home, and so we recognize that a lot of the water that we use, it's clean, treated water. We use it once and then it gets sent into our sewer system. But we have the opportunity to reuse part of this water for another purpose before we're done with it. And so with the gray water, there's a difference between gray water and black water. Black water would be like your toilet water, or your kitchen sink water where you might be washing, chicken and meat products and things like that carry contaminants. Gray water, on the other hand, is water that's from your laundry machine, or maybe your shower, or the sink in your bathroom. For our rebate purposes, we focus directly on the clothes washer because it doesn't require permits. But essentially, you can install hardware to redirect the water from your laundry into the landscape. So I use it to water my fruit trees, to water plants that can use that regular water. So it's just a great way, and I don't have to really think about irrigating them because every time I do a load of laundry, it gets sent out into the landscape. I do have to be conscious of the type of soaps that I use, and if I want to use something more harsh, this photo in the bottom here is just a valve, and you just turn the valve, and then it sends it to the sewer. So people have the opportunity to send it to the sewer also. But it's a pretty cool program. We actually have an offshoot of this right now, which is the direct installation program for disadvantaged communities. So this would be low income, US vet, seniors or disabled community, where we actually will have a contractor go out and install these systems either for free or a greatly reduced price. And so we want to make sure that we're opening these opportunities up to everybody in our county. Another program that we have is our landscape rebate program. This is it is our biggest program that we have for water conservation. We have quite a big budget for it, and it's because we have the most potential of savings here. So we offer rebates for the removal of lawn. Lawn is a high water using plant and requires the use of an irrigation system that basically throws water in the air and hopes that it lands in the right place and encourages a lot of water waste. And so we are encouraging sites to remove their lawn and replace it with low water using plants that are adapted to this area. So it's $1 per square foot. This is for homes, businesses, parks, schools. If you want to encourage San Jose State to remove any lawn and go through our program, take that on as a project. Some areas in our county actually offer additional money, so we have cost-sharing partners. So like the City Palo Alto, Morgan Hill, Cupertino, a few others, they add additional money to our rebate programs, which is pretty cool. Within this, we also rebate for irrigation equipment. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of inefficient irrigation equipment out there, but there's a lot of things on the market now that put water out in a much more efficient way so that the water that you're applying to your landscape is actually going to the plants that need it. It's not running off, it's not blowing away. One of the cool things we rebate for is weather-based irrigation controllers. These controllers use local weather data, and they make automatic adjustments to the irrigation schedule on a daily basis to provide that plant the amount of water that it actually needs for that day, as opposed to just saying, okay, every day you're going to get this amount of water. And so it's pretty interesting, and there's a lot more new ones on the market that you can program from your phone, and you can turn your sprinklers off when you're on vacation or something like that. So we offer rebates for people to install these items, all in the hopes that it's going to increase their efficiency with their irrigation systems. Sorry, I keep touching something when lastly, we added this year, the beginning of this year, we added rainwater capture components to our rebate program. So I'm pretty excited about these. Cistern and rain barrels. A cistern is just, basically a really, really big rain barrel. So just a way of capturing water. It's an alternative water source. We tend to get a lot of water just in the winter and not so much in the summer. So these can capture rainwater during the winter and then can be used during the summer. We also offer rebates for rain gardens, and these are specifically to help recharge our groundwater supply. So a lot of the water, a lot of the old practices when you're building in homes and stuff is to move the water off-site as quickly as possible. And we're finding now that that's actually not the best practice, and so now we recognize that leaving water on site is better. It can help recharge our groundwater supply. It will reduce runoff into our stormwater systems, and so a rain garden is essentially an area in the landscape that helps you redirect your downspouts into this area, and the water recharges into our groundwater supply instead of being redirected to the storm drain system. We also offer rebates for businesses. We offer a rebate for sub-meters. This is for like apartment complexes, maybe a homeowners association. We've found that the way these usually work, if someone's living in an apartment building, their water is oftentimes just wrapped into the rent. But people don't know how much water they're using. So water conservation, if you are not directly paying for your bill, it's not as much of a motivator. And so what a sub-meter does is it individually meters, each home in a homeowners association or each apartment, and then they're able to get a bill directly for the amount of water that they use. We found that this program can be extremely useful, that water use will reduce by 22% on average when these systems are installed. And that's because, really, if people are not conscious of how much water they're using, they're way less likely to conserve water. Or you think that you're doing great, but your neighbor is the one use a bunch. We've heard stories of sites that were evaluated where they all just shared a water bill, and then they found that, one woman had like 20 cats, and her cat, she just left the bath running 24 hours a day for the cats to go drink water from. So it's a pretty interesting thing when you share water and realize that your neighbor might be using quite a bit more than you are. So we also have custom measured rebates. These are pretty interesting because they're from sites that oftentimes it's cooling towers or systems used in a lot of our tech companies that are specialized. But we will go in and we'll measure their water usage before they install this technology, and then we'll measure their water usage after they install this technology, and their rebate is based on how much water they've saved. There was even an ice skating rink in San Jose that used this. They used to just, when they go around and scrape the ice, they had to pile it up in the back, and they have these huge piles of scraped ice, and then they just had these showers just running on it to melt the ice. And so they installed technology to do that much more efficient. So it was an interesting project because it was just very specific, and we couldn't have designed a program for them specifically, but this one allows sites to do that. So it's be a cool engineering project if you had recommendations for a business. I went through this one. I went this one too. But for that program that I was just talking about, the measured rebate, our maximum rebate is $50,000 per site. So it's a pretty hefty rebate that we offer. We will see smaller projects come through, but we've had some sites that have maxed out. All right. One of our, lastly, one of the programs that we have is our water waste inspector program. So we are, as a water wholesaler, we don't have the ability to fine people for wasting water. We're not an authority in that sense. But we have an educational program so that if someone does see water waste or they see that their neighbor's sprinklers are running off the street, we'll send someone out and they will educate them about what current restrictions we have, what rebate programs we can use to help them fix the problem, and just kind of in general educate them on water conservation practices. And so there's a few ways you can use this. There's an app that we have that's Access Valley Water. One of my colleagues, she runs really early in the morning, and on her route, she sees a lot of people irrigating their landscape, and she'll just kind of take a quick snap if a sprinkler is broken. And it's usually pretty helpful to people because they might not know that they have a broken sprinkler, a leaky system, and so this program, you're able to kind of report that. We send somebody out, and they provide information. So you can also call or email or go to our website as well to report that. All right. Lastly, we do a lot of outreach and education. So we do speaking events like this. I'll be speaking at a Santa Clara community garden at the end of the month about rainwater capture. We have another unit that primarily is education for schools, and so they go from kindergarten all through high school. That all the year long they do presentations for schools, hand out materials. We have a lot of literature that we distribute. We take informational handouts to nurseries, to different businesses so that people can use those tools for water conservation. And then we also offer a number of workshops. So we've had workshops on how to design and install a drip irrigation system for landscape professionals. So all of these things that we offer throughout the county. So it's a pretty fun thing to do. All right. Okay, and so that was it for me. But if you have any questions, Michael and I are happy to answer. And I believe Barbara's a microphone in case anybody.
So if you have any questions, we do have a microphone on that side of the room. And so I have a microphone on this side, and go ahead and ask questions of either or both, Michael or Ashley. Okay. And please, let's be polite. Wait till the Q&A session is over before you leave. Any questions?
I have a question for Michael. So you says you guys focus on clean, reliable water. What is it that you do to purify water and bring it back into the system that we drink? Like, do you guys filter the water at the same time? Like, when you guys bring local water from like other places, how do you manage the quality of the water?
Yeah, that kind of comes from two aspects. From the drinking water standpoint, we have our 3 drinking water plants, and they need to meet the state standards in terms of their standards for how much, I can't even really go into them. Yeah, the lead solids. There's a lot into the drinking water standards, and they need to make sure that they meet those standards before it leaves the plant, essentially for distribution to agencies. In the creek side, we also do look at water quality in the creeks. Mercury is a big problem in the Guadalupe watershed. So we have programs looking at raw water or natural water, I guess you'd call it, concerns.
Hello, I have a question about the sub-meter rebate program. How, as a tenant, can I push this idea to my to the management so we could like spend less on rent and conserve more water in total?
So how as you as a tenant could
Push
kind of-
this idea
yeah.
into managers or property owners to install
for this
these.
program, we really found that it's usually someone from the building or the homeowners association that really is kind of like the champion of it. So it actually really does help. It's an odd program. People feel very strongly about it one way or the other. Some people really don't want it. They think it's going to increase the money that they have to pay. But if your homeowners association, if they have that payment built into it, they actually need to reduce your homeowner fees, and then you'll get a water bill. And the same with the rent. So it would, if it was originally in your rent, then the rent itself would need to be decreased, and then you would pay your own water bill. But I would recommend maybe looking into what your apartment complex has currently. Maybe talking with some of the residents to see if there's a consensus and you can get kind of an agreement on it. And then, talking to the management as far as, I feel like sometimes the easiest way is to come at them from a financial standpoint. So, hey, there's a rebate for it. They can help, put the cost for it. And then, overall, it might, save the amount of money that you're paying because we're going to be able to reduce our water usage. And just so, coming at it from that angle is sometimes helpful just from a financial standpoint. And then with the fellow tenants, just from a conservation standpoint, is that, we can all make more of an effort and we, be in charge of our own water usage. But it's found to be really effective. Average 22% water savings is a pretty big number, and that's purely just from behavioral changes from tenants once they are paying their own water bill.
Any other questions?
Got some in the front.
Michael, you said that the climate change had a small effect on water supply, but mostly government did. What does government do to impact our water supply?
I think that it's getting more at the also regulation. In the Delta, and there's a whole suite of discussions to have about regulations to the Delta and what's happening there. And part of that is government directed, different laws that get passed, how they're interpreted by the different agencies that implement them. We project at this time, we've seen decreases in the amount of water that we could get through the Delta. We have contracts for a set amount, but the actual amount of water that we receive is based on not only the hydrology, how much water they have in the reservoirs, but how much water they can move through the system, how much the pumps in Tracy are allowed to pump. And those are all affected by environmental regulation. And we've been seeing a steady decline in the amount that could come through, and that's projected to continue into the future.
How do you guys deal with the homeless problem at the creeks?
So the water district, there's about 700 different employees and numbers of different units. Our unit directly does not have much influence on that, so I can't speak directly from that. I know that we do work with different organizations like the Streets, San Jose Streets. I know that we've given them a grant before, and so we work directly with different organizations, community input, but I don't have too much direct background in it to answer really.
I know we work with the city of San Jose especially, and I thought we were thinking of, maybe we did provide some funding for rangers, like in parks, some of their city parks, to look at issues like that. It's a complicated issue. We've also been looking at using some of our land for like tiny houses to help some of that population. But there's a lot of political issues, obviously, behind that. The Water District has an interest in it because it does directly affect water quality in the creeks when people are living right next to creeks. But again, it's a complicated issue that the district as a whole is working on.
The microphone holder has a question. Ashley, you're particularly proud of your residential rainwater bill
It's new, so I'm excited.
program. And actually, this question's kind of geared for the both of you, since I think what I'm dealing with is supply. Sounds like a terrific idea residentially, and realizing that the entire valley is a flat plain of essentially concrete. What difficulties are involved in, say, collecting rainwater? I understand from the news media that California sends a lot of its rainwater into the bay and ocean. What are the difficulties on doing that on a large-scale basis?
Well, I think that newer infrastructure and regulations have to take stormwater into account more than older ones did, and so for newer construction, you'll see it's a lot more common to see bioswales and curb cuts and permeable paving and stuff like that because it's required for newer construction. The older construction is harder to mandate changes in that. So our rebate program is a way to kind of just encourage people to do it when they're not necessarily required to put in something like a rain garden. We, in our unit specifically, just use educational tools to try to help encourage people to keep water on site. But we have a whole stormwater unit that works on, managing stormwater, making sure that we're, leaving more on site, looking at different projects and grants to help fund projects that will capture stormwater and recharge it into our groundwater system and keep it out of going directly into our system. So there's a number of different things that we look at.
On a larger scale, we are looking at centralized stormwater capture. We call it in the Water Supply Master Plan. We have worked a little with San Jose. They have an interest in not having to expand their system to accommodate new growth. So they have an interest in finding areas where you could send water from a number of neighborhoods, say, to be stored or to percolate into the ground. The main, I think, concern of that is, from our groundwater unit, is you're collecting a lot of pollutants with stormwater, and we don't want to get that into our groundwater system. Our groundwater is still very clean. It really doesn't require any treatment when it's pumped and used for distribution. So just making sure we protect the groundwater from pollutants from a system like that. But it is certainly kind of one of the new hot-button topics going forward, trying to expand water supply.
Mm-hmm. There's we're a member of, it's a really long acronym, it's CVURP, but it's SCVURPPP, which is the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program, which is really long. But they have, guidelines and standards for construction. It's, we actually pulled for our rain gardens. We pulled a lot of information that they had provided as far as groundwater recharge. We took a lot of the requirements for our rebate program directly from what they've done too. So it's an interesting agency, not an agency, but
group. It's a
group
not
to
an
look
agency,
into
yeah.
if you want to learn a little bit more about it.
We have time for one more question.
So you guys are focused on capturing rainwater and then bringing it back into the land, into the ecosystems, correct? Do you guys have any plans when taking seawater or like salt water or anything from the ocean? Like, do you guys have any like investment in that, or what's the like? Have you guys ever thought of plans working with ocean water, seawater?
We have looked at
Desalination.
desalination, I
Yeah.
can't think of the word. In the South Bay itself, it looks like there'd be a lot of environmental issues. The South Bay is pretty environmentally sensitive, so we don't think we'd really have an easy time getting a project there. We are looking at a more broader scale, Bay Area wide. There's a group called BAR, Bay Area Regional Reliability, I think it is. And that's a group of all the water districts in, or the major water districts in the Bay Area. And they're collectively looking at potential for a desal plant, potentially up near Pittsburgh, maybe near the Carquinez Bridge. There's issues with, the cost of it, of course, and then distributing that to the different agencies, how you kind of wheel water around. It's possible, but cost, environmental concerns still need to be overcome before that becomes a reality.
We also have our advanced purification plant as well. That's is treating wastewater as an alternative source too. But by far, though, water conservation is one of the least expensive methods of meeting water demands is through water conservation. So we definitely want to make sure that we're doing as much through that and we're as efficient with it as possible, and then also looking at these alternative water sources on top of that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your good questions. And let's thank our speakers.